Okay, and we are live. Hello, ANCAP Radio, and thank you for joining us for another episode here today on December 28th, 2023, last episode of the year. I'm going to go ahead and say apologies in advance today if you get any coughing from me. Still working our way through this lingering cold that we got, but the show goes on, and today we are joined by Luis Kenny, Argentinian, born in 1955. He's seen it all there in his homeland. He's an attorney, a CV or a resume that'll just completely blow your mind. I'll allow him to kind of dive into it here in a moment. But before we do that, we just want to say hello and welcome again to all those live with us and on the replay. If it's your first time here or a repeat listener, make sure you hit the like button, the retweet button, and give everyone up here on stage a follow today as we dive in with Luis Kenny. And you can see the topic at least we're gonna start off with here today is Javier Milei, and is he actually who he claims to be? Luis had a very interesting write up that I had a chance to read recently that had me wanting him to come on here and talk about this. So Luis, great to see you, and I do see we have Doug with us as well. I think Doug's going to contribute a little bit today as well, so we'll get him up on stage here in a moment. But Luis, great to have you here, and could you just tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you became an ANCAP?
Hi, guys. I'm sure that Doug is going to say much nicer or better things than I do. I became an ANCAP almost because, as a family tradition, my father was libertarian, and in a time where that word was practically non-existent in Argentina, he formed part of a small group of intellectuals who followed the libertarian ideas and basically the Austrian school of economics. I have been an attorney all my life. I studied briefly out of Argentina, but basically I've lived here almost all my life, and I have seen quite a few things. It is my privilege today to try and fathom where the new president of Argentina, Mr. Milei, which was elected on a runoff of 56% of the vote, beating his Peronist rival for about 12%. And, he declares himself a libertarian, an ANCAP. And the question is, will he be able to impose reforms, how he rose to power, and the fight he has got ahead to stay there and prevail. So the first question that I think we have, and which I find rather interesting, is how and why a person who defines himself as a libertarian, ANCAP, gets to the presidency of what is basically an historically very state-oriented country, with at least 35% to 40% of the population severely, may I say, inclined to the populist state intervention system, to the point of socialism, communism, and even, why not, fascism. There is, in my view, there is no right or left, or on top or under. Today, you are either on the side of freedom and liberties, or you're not. And Mr. Milei seems to be. I think that the only explanation that one has to find this, the reasons why a libertarian wins in such a country like this, once at least, is to look into the story of the country and to find the reasons of what I would call an insatiable need and longing for change in part of the population. I hope that I'll tell you a short story which will be interesting to the audience.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Continue.
After William Goodwin, considered, as you know, the founder of philosophical anarchism, and Sébastien Faure, the French philosophy, Both teach that anyone negating the authorities and that fights the authorities is really an anarchist. The Royal Academy of Spanish Language defines anarchism somewhat like that, believing in the disappearing of the state and all powers, really. In Argentina, funnily enough, the person that claims to fit into these definitions is the head of a state. I find such a fear fascinating, an oxymoron rather. But Argentina, as you will see, is full of contradictions. I sometimes think it's the craziest country in the world, as you will find out shortly. And I hope it is entertaining for you. If you fall asleep, please stop me in my tracks forthwith. But with those who are not familiar with the country, it is located in the southern tip of the American continent, just below Brazil, next to Chile, borders also with Bolivia, Paraguay, and across the River Plate with Uruguay. I remember as a child, we used to like to think that we lived at the end of the railway line, like the last station, so to speak. Argentina has a population of 46 million, is the 8th largest country in the world in geographical terms, an ex-Spanish colony, which gained independence in 1816, and funnily enough, abolished slavery in 1813, almost before anybody else in the Spanish Empire, and certainly in the American, South American continent. And as happens, then proceeded to conduct what I would call an intermittent civil war between 1820 and 1853. A dictatorship by somebody called Rosas, which lasted for many years in that period, confirming, as was the Greeks, I think, that used to say that anarchy or anomia are always followed by tyranny. Anyway, the country approved in 1853 a constitution which was modeled after the US document and organized a federation. This initial constitution, inspired by the ideas of a great man called Juan Bautista Alberti, claimed for a minimum state intervention in the economy, freedom of the individual, a strong sense of property fundamentally. Today, the federation is composed by 22 provinces and an autonomous city of Buenos Aires. By the way, Buenos Aires is only 3 million people, but if you calculate the metro Buenos Aires, 30% of the population, or about 46 million, live in that very small area. Anyhow, to continue with the story, Argentina hit the deck running. By the end of the century, of the 19th century, I mean, it was amongst the first producers of wheat, and the economy was between the fastest growing in the world and was also one of the first exporters of beef. By 1920, thousands of immigrants had arrived and thrived, and some 50% of the Argentine population had been born abroad, mainly in Spain and Italy. And I have to say they were hard workers, and especially their children were assimilated by an education system which was created deliberately to such effect. The distinctive note was that all the country adhered to the principles of freedom, no state intervention, and unrestricted respect to the right of property. During this period, which I would place between 1880 and 1920, Argentina was arguable, but behind the US, the country that geographically grew the most, incorporating the whole Patagonia. Many of you probably have heard of this area. It incorporated it to its territory. Also, this Patagonia was claimed by Chile. Chile was engrossed at the time in a war with Bolivia and Peru, and quickly capitulated to the demands of Argentina. So by about 1880, geographically, Argentina was consolidated, and except for small problems with Bolivia and basically with Chile, the whole geographic country was, again, I say, consolidated. The native population of Patagonia were either assimilated or pushed to live against the Andes Mountains. It's rather funny to think how still today that great maneuver, or what I at least seem to consider a great maneuver, is questioned by the woke and progressive left sector movements and other fools of that kind. But this story, which started so brightly, was ruined, or started to be ruined, by 1930. The story starts to change. The 1929 crisis in the United States following the Depression affected Europe, which were the principal buyers of Argentine exports. And under a president called Irigoyen, Argentina unfortunately abandoned the gold conversion system. It had followed for many years, this system, and by 1935, Argentina had created a central bank, the very central bank that Mr. Milei wants now abolished, and claims that it cost the Argentine people a mere 5% of GDP per annum. During the Second War, Argentina remained neutral but sided somewhat with the Axis, to change later and declare war on Germany and Japan. I think it was as late as 1944. Having said this, and in so many other matters, the population was evenly divided between supporting both sides. A little as happens today, there is a void between two forms of looking at life and the world. The acute state intervention, inaugurated in 1930, timid at first, voraciously later, started with the president of, as I said, Irigoyen, and then continued without pause until it climaxes in 1946 to 1955 during both Perón presidencies. From 1955 onwards, Argentina has had up and downs, civilian governments, three military regimes, the last one between 1976 and 1983, that caused many casualties on both sides due to the so-called dirty war waged between the armed forces and at least three guerrilla groups. Some 9,000 people disappeared under this regime on both sides, and although, again using the old word left, claims of 30,000 dead, this is a number that is only for propaganda purposes. Actually, there is no evidence that such a number is nearly accurate by any measures. But during this period, you might ask what happened to the economy. And it is interesting because following a third Peronist government elected in 1973, there is in 1975 an hyperinflation process, the first one, that opens a 16-year period, usually, and hang on to your seats, of three-digit annual inflation. In 1989 and 1990, another bout of hyperinflation totaling 3,000% for one year and about 2,000 and odd percent for the next. Then Mr. Menem was elected and he liberalized the economy, pegged the peso to the US dollar, significantly cut down on spending, and privatized public companies. This inaugurates a period of about 10 years of great success and growth, with the central bank, and here is the key, banned from printing fiat money, only could print pesos as long as US dollars were collected by the bank, and those mirroring pesos were put into the market. A little like the conversion rate of gold, which had been abandoned in 1930. Although Mr. Menem was not a libertarian, he acted very much like one. So after his presidency in 2001, a new crisis controlled by basically spending in the last Menem years with an enormous debt struck the country. This time, it literally melted people's savings. Many banks failed, and the government, unable to pay for the money borrowed, issued bonds and confiscated bank accounts. This in turn caused a wave of court actions that the banks lost, and the government lost too, but in the process, the government had reprogrammed both internal and foreign debt. Also, the peso was disengaged from the US dollar. Again, a lot like the gold standard had been abandoned in the 30s, as explained before. To summarize 80 years of economic history, since 1946, Argentina has averaged 67% per annum inflation without taking into account the peaks of hyperinflation that I just mentioned. And again, here is a number which is going to blow your mind. The peso of 1946 was corrected by 13 zeros due to the changes of currencies and their names and the reforms that went with them. So 1 peso of 1946, or indeed that peso my grandparents gave me for ice cream at the corner store, is today equivalent to that peso plus 13 zeros. My head, and I guess yours, reel at this number, which I quite frankly fail to pronounce. And why is this short account of economic history important for me for today's subjects? You're surely thinking this. And I think because Mr. Milei sees Argentina's history very much like I have narrated here, which comes as no surprise, really, because we both define ourselves as ANCAPs at heart. So against the backdrop of this story, starting in 1970, which is the year that the son of a bus driver and a housewife, Mr. Milei, who is a racial mix of Italian and Croatian, that is a typical Argentine middle-class project, is that Milei lived in the Argentine Republic and learned firsthand about this, I only can confirm, as a veritable Greek drama. May I add that even so, Argentina remained until this day, miraculously, I can say, one of the largest beef and agricultural exporters, has been until a few years exporter of oil, has one of the largest reserves of natural gas and lithium in the world. Also, the estimated mining potential is enormous in the Andes Mountains, mainly there. And as the English used to say, up to 1939, when they were our largest and most important commercial partner, they had a saying that went, "What the Argentines ruin during the day, the Pampa repairs at night." I find this definition quite fitting for this 80-year quick story that I have trying to tell you in order to position Mr. Milei and ourselves actually right now where we stand. So the young Milei, yes.
Oh, you're great. I wasn't sure if you were done. Please continue.
Sorry. Well, what was I? The young Milei attended private school. His schoolmates called him el loco. El loco means literally in Spanish the crazy one. He then studied economics in a private university, earning an economics degree, later two master's degrees, I think, in macroeconomics and mathematics, also in private universities. He became a classical economist, a university professor, and worked in a number of private companies, having done an internship, which, funnily enough, was not renewed. By the way, the internship was in the central bank, the same one that he wants to now abolish. And the internship was not renewed. He was very young after the first year because of his rebellious, and now I read, rebellious personality and independent behavior. He had, quite obviously, some trouble following instructions. Mr. Milei has published several books on economics and a significant, almost 50 papers on the subject of macroeconomics and mathematics for economists. Starting in, let's say, 2010 approximately, Milei, apart from working in private companies, started appearing in TV shows, all specialized in economics, and was the subject of many interviews. He was an interesting guy to follow. His brash manner, including insults to Keynesians, socialists, communists, and other members of the political class, were famous. His language was foul, and his tussle hairdo earned him the nickname of Peluca. Peluca means a toupee. He was an immediate hit. He is partial to rock and roll, actually played in a band, and created an ANCAP superhero with clothes which he has appeared in public with. Very interesting. Gradually, Milei became more and more libertarian until directed, I would say, almost philosophically towards the Austrian economists, namely by someone in Argentina called Dr. Alberto Venegas Lynch Jr., who is probably the theoretical leader of that school in Argentina. Venegas Lynch's story, which is very interesting, is a second-generation libertarian, a pal of my father, actually, an economist professor, a dean of the Economic University, a well-known academist in science and economics. I have been told by Venegas Lynch himself that he introduced Milei to Rothbard von Mises, Röpke, Hayek, and others. So much so that Milei has named him in numerous times, appearances on TV, on radio, during his campaign, thanked him, and especially thanked Benegas Lynch by name in his presidential inaugurational speech. Milei didn't just spring up and became a president. He became a legislator in 2020. And during his campaign, he did not cease to criticize and actually insult and blame what he called the caste. And I quote, "those corrupt rats that are all thieves, the mafia." This concept became central in his campaign. These were for him parasites, politicians, certain protected businessmen, as he defined them, and the unions, all organizations living from other good citizens' efforts. I translate taxes, and indeed the culprits of most of Argentina's social, political, and economical troubles. He went once as far as announcing, and he actually went through with it. He made a monthly raffle with anyone who would put down his name in a list, in an electronic list, with his congressional salary as the prize. From this launching pad, he presented himself as presidential candidate. The rest is history. Surprisingly, Milei won the election with the backing, yes, and I would say historical and I would say decisive backing of the more conservative Juntos por el Cambio party of Mr. Macri, who had governed between 2015 and 2019. But notably, and here's the interesting, I think, part of the Milei story, the voters of under 30 years old became his principal supporters. He won by 56% of the vote in the runoff election, but it's presumed that the young vote in all social classes, from upper middle classes down to young people in shanty towns, was far greater than that. The reason behind this is that Milei must have been right, I think, when he blamed the caste, because it was them, not him, that had brought steadily during decades to the present state of affairs the economy of Argentina, and thus poverty and other educational problems. So the state of affairs when Milei was campaigning was disastrous. There was a Peronist presidency in place, and which practically was based on printing money and handouts. Mr. Milei inherited from that Peronist government a massive debt, both international and local. The international debt, mostly by the scoundrels of the IMF. Some of it is already non-performing. Inflation is running at 140% per annum. Price controls and regulations are countless. They are certainly drowning the economy. And by the way, we are one of only 3 countries in the world that have taxes on exports. There are millions of pesos spent in so-called social programs, handouts, 40% of poverty, a number that exceeds 50% if you only take into account children, and close to 15% of the population has trouble making ends meet to survive. The Peronist Party spent an estimated 2% of GDP in handouts and other expenses in order to win the elections that they lost. The incredible thing, it was all financed with printing fiat money, which of course is good for absolutely nothing. Inflation is expected to hit 20% in January, but before you say, well, 20% is not so terrible, I'm talking about 20% per month, not annually, and another 20% for the month of February before it starts to ease. Now, the market has received Milei well. Most of Argentina papers, both local and international, bonds and equity, are in the green. And in his first day of government, Milei cut down from 19 ministries to 9. And by doing this, he eliminated an estimated 54% of the high-ranking officials and over 30% of the middle high-ranked public officials. He has promised there is more to come. In fact, today in the official gazette, there is a law which has been sent last night to Congress with some 600 articles, which I haven't had time, of course, to read, but I understand go in the same direction. Within the first week, Milei issued a massive executive order authorized under the Constitution. The order would be long to analyze here because it's also massive. It is quite clear they have been working for months betting on a win, and when they did, this program touches such matters as the reform of the state, the elimination of all price controls. Argentina has all types of price controls, or had until a few days ago, all sorts of price controls, medical care, food, soy, any kind of produce, and a real incredible amount of regulations of all kinds you can imagine. He also eliminated the permits to import and export, not the taxes though, those are earmarked to be reduced dramatically. He liberalized almost all mining rules and other reforms. All of these, I can say, in the same direction. We are in at least in my job, in my profession, still analyzing what this means in legal terms. The promised reduction in taxes and the electoral reform, which are also in his calendar and in his promises, will have to wait until next year because those are matters which are reserved by the Constitution to Congress. The liberalization which I have just described is an executive order, which is a type of executive order that needs to go through Congress and is going to be analyzed and voted probably during the month of January. And all of you, of course, after listening to all this, are thinking, as I am, that if he won by 56%, there is another 46% that oppose these changes. Some of them oppose them heartily. Will Argentina turn into Liberland? Of course not. I am pretty sure that this is impossible. I would like it. Many of you fellow libertarians and ANCAPs would, I'm sure, but this will not happen. The void, I think, is too deep to close, and there would never be consensus. I think that you all will agree that to achieve a pacific coexistence between people who are ANCAPs, there has to be almost 100% consensus on the system. And I know that the word system and ANCAP don't go hand in hand together, but at the end of the day, it is a system that sublimates liberty. And well, with that, I rest my case, and I will listen to your questions if you have some.
Well,
I
thank
don't
you.
guarantee answers, though.
Well, thank you, Luis, very much for the context of the story. It's exactly why we wanted you here, and I think you brought to light a lot of information, at least personally, that I wasn't aware of, and hopefully many here weren't as well, just to get the full context of Milei's background and what's going on in Argentina. I do have a few questions here. I'm sure the audience as well. If you guys want to, all you have to do is tap the request to speak button at the bottom of the screen, and we can get you up here. But Doug, I have to turn to you as well. I know you and Luis go way back. You're good friends, and just want to know kind of your thoughts on the story he's shared with us here today. And your mic is on mute right now, by the way, Doug.
Yeah, well, I completely agree. It's a very good presentation that Luis made about the background of Argentina and the background of Milei. I want to be more optimistic. I can't help myself being more optimistic. Of all the countries in Latin America, I think Luis would certainly agree, Argentina is the most outward looking. It's the most classical European, classical liberal, biggest movement within Argentina towards those things. So it's always had this going on. And when I decided I wanted to relocate kind of the focus of my life outside the US, I mean, I lived in the Orient for years and liked it a lot. But it seemed to me that in the Western Hemisphere, Argentina was the place. And against all odds, I think we've won a bet with Milei. I'm just afraid that the criminal class here in Argentina, although I'm speaking to you right now from Uruguay, across the Plate River, I just hope that the criminal class doesn't totally stultify everything he wants to do. You know, the unions and the professional politicians and the corrupt businessmen that are so in bed with the government and don't want to have their rice bowls broken. You know, on the other hand, I look at what happened in Chile under Pinochet. Everybody thinks he's the devil incarnate. And it's true, I guess. I mean, who knows? That maybe he killed a couple thousand people, which by Latin American standards is not a lot. It's absolutely zero by African standards. But he turned it from the most backward, well, not the most backward, but from a backward mining province with good weather into by far the most prosperous country in Latin America. And of course, they want to indict him and make him a war criminal for all that because he free marketized in the process. So if Pinochet could do that in Chile, where everybody hated him, maybe Milei can do it in Argentina, where he's not going to have to use the army. I'm optimistic, but I'm just talking my book because probably idiotically, me and a bunch of friends put a whole bunch of money here in Argentina prematurely. But we may turn out to be right after all. So anyway, I feel pretty good about it.
Luis, I know you said you weren't you're open to answers but not guaranteed any. Did you have any thoughts there for Doug?
No. Doug's right, in the sense that uh, almost undoubtedly Argentina has a mix. Argentina is, as Doug once defined, probably the most European country in the world. And also, the prospects of Argentina, if Milei just gets, let's say, 30% of his promises through, Argentina is going to become again, right, a thriving place to live in, a vibrant place to do business, and certainly, investments are going to be not only welcome but secure and again thriving. No doubt about that. But the road there is going to be difficult. Look, Milei's inaugurational speech was on the 10th of December. And that corrupt class, the rats, the caste, what Doug described quite rightly as not only the unions, the workers' representatives, by the way, who do not represent anyone. You're only collecting money in their own pockets, and quite a number of other union members who are the employers, who are only union members with Hermes ties, neckties. Those are going to resist, and again, already from the 10th of December until today, there have been at least 2 demonstrations on the streets. Milei has vowed to avoid pickets and not use the armed forces, but yes, to use, police and other security forces to avoid this, because he has a constitutional right to implement these reforms. And I am optimistic that he will be able to implement quite a few of them. One, because there is no other way out. When you are in a crisis like this, you either adjust the economy in a way that is not savage, so to speak, or the market will adjust it savagely. So this is a way to do it, which is, I think at least, by the book. What I was trying to say is that Argentina will not become an ANCAP country, but I am sure that Milei will be able to implement 20 to 40% of his proposals. I don't think he will ever be able to abolish the central bank. But with 30 or 40% of the reforms, I am pretty sure that the country is going to, leap forward, be a vibrant country to do business in, and a vibrant country to live in. Taxes are going to go down, and we will get back again into the track of civilization.
Yeah, I'll second that emotion, Luis, because I think Argentina is really one of the most pleasant countries in the world to live in. If you have dollars, it's got one of the highest standards of living. I don't know how much things have changed since we last came across the plate, but I think it's still probably the cheapest Western country in the world to buy something in a restaurant or anything like that. I mean, things seem like they're almost free.
And we do
Well,
have our first calls coming through here now, Luis and Doug. So see Wogpog, Fact Checker, Cape, and MK, we're going to get to you in a moment. But Wogpog, if you could just let us know where you're calling in from and what your one question is, that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, sure. I got sort of a multi-prong or great space. I'm calling in from BC, west coast of Canada. I'm actually traveling through high mountain passes, so I might lose you guys. Keep this brief. I'll try to pop in again and ask another one if it doesn't get too busy in here. But very, very good. I've been monitoring Javier Milei for quite a long time. I'm sort of fascinated here, but I guess my main question, just hitting back at what we were just speaking of a couple seconds ago, it appears like he's sort of implementing a martial law light for protests. We saw that the sort of one pager they put out that they're getting ready for civil unrest on a large scale, and of course, when it's for something that you're for, it's not a big deal. But I worry about the reverse polarity or setting the stage here. So that basically the question is the suspension of civil rights. Are we concerned about that? And maybe some comments on that. So thanks a lot again. Great space.
Thank you. Great question. Milei has been very clear in his inaugurational speech. He has said, within the law, everything; outside the law, nothing. There is no talk at all of implementing martial law. The only talk there is that as I have a right to circulate in the streets and on the roads, there is no pickets cutting traffic will be allowed. You will be allowed to demonstrate as guaranteed in the Constitution, respecting your fellow citizens' rights to circulate in the city of Buenos Aires and the other cities in the country. But and for that, they will use, again, as I said, not the military, but police forces, the national, federal, and provincial police forces, and that's all. But there's no talk of curtailing civil rights of any kind. Furthermore, it is that is guaranteed by an institutional system, the courts, which act pretty swiftly. And in a country that has had so many upheavals, that we still have a judiciary that works and protects citizens' rights is, in my opinion, quite amazing. So no, I don't fear that there will be any martial law or curtailing of citizens' rights to protest or manifest or anything of that sort.
Thank you, Luis. And now we have Cape Breton Highlander. Sounds like we might have another Canuck here. So that's interesting. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, Cape Breton. You got to unmute yourself, but feel free to let us know where you're calling in from and what your question for Luis and Doug is.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I certainly am calling in from Canada. I'm not from Cape Breton. Cape Breton Highlanders was a regiment my grandfather fought under during the First World War at Vimy Ridge. So that's where the screen name comes from. But I'm calling from Saskatchewan, from the prairies. That's where I'm working currently. I'm from southeastern Ontario, which is central eastern Canada. I guess it's not so much a question, I suppose, as to the question posed in the title. Is he who he claims to be? I don't think any of us truly has the answer to that. I would simply say, does it matter? If he implements the policies that he's promised to implement, and I've heard the figure of 20 to 40%, which would be fantastic. If he implemented 10% of the policies that he's promised to implement, Argentina would be in a far better place. So is he who he claims to be? I would just simply say I don't think any of us know. I think if you claim to know, you're lying. I would just say it's quite analogous with what happened in the U.S. Under Donald Trump. I don't think Trump was who he claimed to be, but he implemented some policies that were, beneficial for the country. So, there was the classic picture of him walking out in front of the church, holding the Bible upside down. Do I believe he's a Christian? He portrays himself as a Christian. I don't believe he is. I don't believe he's ever practiced a faith. To be quite frank, I think he's got a God complex. He's a religion unto himself. But the point was, he was standing up for the rights of Christians. So, at the end of the day, is he who he claims to be? I don't know. I just don't think it matters. If he enacts the policies that he campaigned under, then I think that Argentina is in a better place going forward. I appreciate the space, and I'll drop down to listener for now. Thank you.
That was a great comment. Yes, I agree totally. I can't tell who he is really either. I would be inventing. I can just describe him for what I have heard, for what I have collected from people who know him. But of course, I cannot define him as such. He seems to be what he says he is, but all, I may be brash saying this, but all what is important is how much of his plan he is able to implement. And as I repeat again, if he did 20 or 30% of what he says, then it would be absolutely fantastic. Again, I can't guarantee he is what he says to be, or he just used a personality, an interesting personality, a brash personality to get to where he is. But what he's doing is going in the right direction. So, I would give him the chance.
Yeah, I agree, Luis. And it seems to me that he's walking the walk, not just talking the talk. Didn't he come out with a statement just the other day reaffirming the right of Argentines to defend themselves with weapons?
Yes, Doug, not only that, today, as you know, criminal matters are managed by Congress, not by executive orders. Today, there was a project sent to Congress which reanalyzes the whole criminal situation of how you can shoot someone inside your home or outside your home, in fact, if you're a victim of a crime, and what are the consequences. And it goes, yes, it goes in that direction. And, you not every time that you get mugged and you manage to get hold of a gun and shoot somebody, you go to jail. In fact, this is changing. And again, he cannot use an executive order for that. He has to send the project to Congress. That went to Congress yesterday.
That's very gratifying. And before I forget, I guess responding to this question, who is he really? Of course, I don't know him personally either, but like you, I have a number of friends that are libertarians and ANCAPs that do know him personally, and they say he's the real deal. And as close as I can come to determining that is an anecdote that I may have mentioned before on this channel. It said a friend of mine that I bought some real estate in Patagonia from years ago. We were talking philosophy at dinner, and I said, "Listen, Jorge, you really ought to read this book called The Market for Liberty by the Tannehills, and it'll explain in detail how a society without government would work." And usually you recommend a book like that to somebody. That's where it just ends there. Nobody ever reads the book. Well, nobody reads books today anyway. But it turns out Jorge not only read the book, but it changed his thinking, and he translated it into Spanish and had it published in Argentina. And this is where it gets interesting. Milei got a copy of that book. Did Jorge give it to him or did he buy it? I don't know. I can't remember. But Milei read the book. And it was at that point that he started identifying as an ANCAP. That's what Jorge says. So anyway, I asked Jorge when I spoke to him a month ago or something, I said, well, Jorge, that must mean that once he's installed as president, we'll get invited to the Casa Rosada for a free lunch. And Jorge says, no, we won't. Milei doesn't believe in free lunches. So I think I think he's the real deal. I really do.
And you just learned, everybody, we just learned something new today. Javier Milei is now the president of Argentina because of Doug Casey.
in my dreams.
No, but that's undoubtedly, he has read a lot. He is very proficient in theoretical terms. And he's not a guy that just speaks out of the top of his mind. He's a guy who reads, who studies, and who has very certainly prepared this for a long time. I mean, it's taking us lawyers, hours and hours of reading and comparing, because the job they have done, and I have been told that he has followed the process very closely, right? The job they have done is monumental.
So my question, Luis, and Doug, maybe you could shed some light here as well. And just so everyone knows here as well, on ANCAP Radio, we normally go for about an hour. We're going to wind it down here, I'd say, within the next 10 minutes. So if you did have a question or you want to make a comment. Oh, I do see we have a caller here. But quick question, I guess, then we'll get to our caller. How do you interpret this as, what does it mean for the world? How does this impact other countries, other nations, or does it just kind of stay in Argentina?
Give you my opinion. It's that Luis and I both have a friend in Uruguay who's a Dutch banker who's lived in Uruguay for years. And he's of the opinion that Europe is going down the toilet so quickly that at some point, and he said this long before Milei was elected, and he was talking about Uruguay, not Argentina, that there were going to be tens of thousands, scores of thousands of Europeans that have the right values, rich and with the right values, that would emigrate to Uruguay, because it's actually a very mellow, peaceful, nice place. But if Milei succeeds even a little bit, Argentina would be a better destination for them than Uruguay. So my hope is if Milei serves out his full term and keeps the momentum going, there's going to be lots of Europeans, as well as Americans and Canadians and others, that are going to want to come to Argentina. And that'll help cement the trend. So I'm optimistic.
Yeah, me too, Doug. Me too.
Yeah, thank you for your thoughts there, and that's also something to make note of. I'm sure for those of you who are just getting to know Doug, it's not often that he says he's optimistic. So write that one down. John Leask, you're our last caller today. Good to see you. I know we've had you as a featured guest here on the show before as well. I know you've got a few friends, I think, in Argentina that you work with. So good to see you. And could you just let us know what your question is, and we'll wind things down from here.
Yeah, good to be on. I was just gonna make a comment. I unfortunately missed the beginning of this, but I don't think this comment was made, and I just wanted to pick up on what Doug said about no such thing as a free lunch. I think this is news as of yesterday, but I guess Milei has now passed a law called Articulo 209. I'm not sure if you guys discussed that or not, but now they prevent, if it comes out of government, for them to use the word free when they're promoting any kind of service that they're providing, because it misleads the population. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Yes, correct. That is correct. There's no
more good news. Wow.
It's interesting because Milei's program has 3 stages of of reforms. And the third stage, which is the more libertarian, if one wants, stage, has there is no such thing as free education anymore, or health anymore. It is interesting how he calls those. There are support by the state if you can't study, and so you get some help, which then you have to return so the state can help somebody else study. But there's no more what is called today commonly a free education or free medicine or free health or free nothing. We all know that, as Doug said, and is such a saying, there's no free lunches, especially in a state. There is no free nothing. I mean, it's always paid by by taxes, and taxes is us, actually.
Well said, and that's great to hear. And I always think about Doug's also his other reference, which is it shouldn't be called healthcare; it should be called sickness care, because if you're healthy, you don't need it. And right now, as you can kind of hear it in my voice, especially those who are familiar with the show, I kind of need a little bit of sickness care right now, but not healthcare. So, anyways, Doug and Luis, this has been awesome, a lot of fun. Luis, you're I'd say one of the most prepared guests we've ever had on the show. So we look forward to hopefully having you on again in the future. Could you just briefly kind of share maybe your number one takeaway from today's conversation? And then Doug, we'll go to you as well, and then we'll close it out.
Yes, thank you. Look, again, to summarize, I think that all of us in the call, we are ANCAPs. We know that our aspirations are mostly teleological, and that it is almost probably impossible to implement a country of 46 million souls divided ideologically without a government. But my take away from this is if we can do 20 to 30% of what the government is saying that we're going to do, I'm happy for what is my future, and especially my children and grandchildren. So thank you for having me. And this basically is a breath of fresh air. I'm sure going to be following you every Thursday. Bye, guys, and thank you very much for having me as a guest.
Thank you so much, Luis. Doug, any final takeaways?
Yeah, I've for many years urged people to, if they were in a financial position, to diversify politically. I mean, you want to always diversify financially, so all your eggs aren't in one basket, but your political risks are much more important than your financial risks today, and your financial risks are huge today. So here's the thought. If you want to diversify internationally, Argentina may well be the best country in the world to diversify into because it's cheap. You can buy things for bargain basement prices. The country's going the right way, and hopefully it's going to continue going that way. So if you're thinking about diversifying, and you should, Argentina's got to be maybe the number one choice in the world right now.
Very well said, and I saw some reactions there from the crowd. Looks like many agree. So, Doug, thank you. Luis, thank you. Everyone who tuned in here today on NCAP Radio, great to have you here. If you're not already following Luis, Doug, the show, make sure you go ahead and follow everyone up here on stage. There are links in the thread below if you haven't checked those out yet. Some to the books that were referenced, Luis's website, updates for NCAP Radio as we get ready to unveil the website. And this is our last episode for the year. So we will see you guys next week, 3 p.m. Eastern as usual. And we'll be with Gregory Sams. Gregory's phenomenal. I'm sure we'll have a write-up on him soon on the Twitter page here. So stay tuned. And everyone, you have a very free and happy new year. And we'll see you in 2024. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Adam.